The flashing red and blue lights painted the upscale neighborhood in stark shadows as Karen Whitmore pointed her manicured finger like a weapon. "That's him, officer. The vagrant who's been trespassing on my property." Her voice cracked with righteous fury, but something flickered in the young man's dark eyes, not fear, but something far more dangerous. A slow smile spread across his face as he reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a leather folder that would shatter her world. In 20 seconds flat. The deed. The one with his name on it. The one that proved she'd been living in his house for the morning started like any other Tuesday in Meadowbrook Heights, where manicured lawns competed for perfection and HOA violations were treated like federal crimes. Karen Whitmore stood at her kitchen window, steam rising from her third cup of coffee, watching the world through expensive plantation shutters that filtered the sunlight into neat, controlled slats. At 52, Karen had perfected the art of suburban surveillance. She knew Mrs. Henderson's grocery delivery schedule, could identify every car that belonged on Elm Street, and had memorized the garbage pickup routes down to the minute. It was a skill she'd honed during her 15 years as the neighborhood's unofficial guardian, a role she'd appointed herself to after moving into 247 Elm Street following her divorce. The house had been a steal, really. A foreclosure that came on the market just as her settlement money hit the bank. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, with a view of the community park. The previous owners had apparently defaulted on their mortgage after some family tragedy. She'd never bothered to learn the details. Their loss was her gain. Karen adjusted the pearl necklace at her throat and prepared to start her day when movement across the street caught her attention. A figure was walking along the sidewalk. No, not walking. Prowling. That was the only word for it. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, tall and lean, wearing dark jeans and a leather jacket. Despite the spring warmth, his black hair was slightly too long, touching his collar, and there was something about his posture that immediately set Karen's teeth on edge. He moved with the casual confidence of someone who belonged, but she'd never seen him before. In Meadowbrook Heights, that was impossible. The young man slowed as he approached her house, then stopped completely. He stood there for a long moment, his hands in his pockets, studying her property with an intensity that made Karen's skin crawl. His gaze swept across her perfectly maintained garden, the pristine white picket fence she'd installed last spring. The brass address numbers she'd polished just yesterday. "Excuse me," Karen muttered under her breath, setting down her coffee with a sharp clink. "What do you think you're doing?" As if he'd heard her through the window, the strangers had turned toward the house. For one heart-stopping moment, their eyes met across the distance. Karen jerked back from the window, her pulse quickening. When she peered out again, he was walking away, but slowly, as if he had all the time in the world. Karen's hands trembled as she reached for her phone. This was exactly the kind of situation the neighborhood watch group had prepared for. Suspicious individuals casing properties. It was probably a burglar, or worse, one of those drifters who'd been causing problems in the next town over. She speed-dialed Melissa Crawford, the HOA president and her closest ally in maintaining neighborhood standards. "Melissa, it's Karen. We have a situation." "What kind of situation?" Melissa's voice carried the crisp efficiency of someone accustomed to handling crises, from improperly trimmed hedges to unauthorized paint colors. "There's a suspicious man loitering outside my house. Young, scruffy-looking. Definitely doesn't belong here. He was studying my property like he was planning something." "Did you get a good look at him?" "Dark hair, leather jacket, early 20s maybe. He had that look, you know. Like trouble." Karen moved to her front window, carefully positioned behind the curtain. "He's gone now, but I have a feeling he'll be back." "I'll send out an alert to the group," Melissa said. "And Karen, call the police if you see him again. We can't be too careful these days." After hanging up, Karen spent the next hour checking every window, every lock, every possible entry point. She'd worked too hard to build her perfect life in this perfect neighborhood to let some vagrant destroy it. The afternoon brought a Pilates class and grocery shopping, but Karen found herself distracted, constantly looking over her shoulder. When she returned home around 4 o'clock, arms full of organic produce and imported wine, she spotted him again. This time, he wasn't on the sidewalk. He was standing at the edge of her property, one hand resting on her fence post, the other shading his eyes as he looked up at her house. The afternoon sun caught the sharp angles of his face, and Karen could see he was younger than she'd first thought. Maybe 25 at most. Oh, hell no, she breathed, dropping her reusable shopping bags on the driveway. She marched toward him, her heels clicking against the concrete with military precision. "Excuse me. What exactly do you think you're doing?" The young man turned slowly, and Karen was struck by his eyes, dark brown, almost black, with an intensity that made her step back involuntarily. Up close, she could see he was actually quite handsome, in that dangerous way that attracted the wrong kind of attention. But handsome or not, he was trespassing. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice surprisingly educated, lacking the rough edges she'd expected. "I was just what? Casing my house. Planning a break-in." Karen's voice rose with each word. "I've been watching you, mister. This is the second time today you've been skulking around my property." A small frown appeared between his brows. "Your property?" "Yes, my property. I own this house, and I'm ordering you to leave before I call the police." Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of confusion, then something that might have been amusement. "I think there might be some misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding is you thinking you can intimidate me." Karen pulled out her phone with shaking fingers. "I'm calling 911 right now." "Please, if you'd just let me explain." 911, what's your emergency?" "This is Karen Whitmore at 247 Elm Street in Meadowbrook Heights. There's a suspicious man on my property who refuses to leave. I need police assistance immediately." The young man's shoulders sagged, and he shook his head slowly. "You're making a mistake. The only mistake was you thinking you could intimidate a woman living alone." Karen's voice carried clearly to the neighbors who were beginning to emerge from their houses, drawn by the commotion. "But you picked the wrong house and the wrong woman." Perfect. An audience. Karen had always performed better with witnesses to a righteous indignation. "Officers are on their way," the dispatcher informed her. "Please stay on the line until they arrive." The young man didn't run, which surprised Karen. Instead, he simply stood there, his hands now clasped behind his back, watching her with those unsettling dark eyes. There was something in his expression that made her suddenly uncomfortable. But she pushed the feeling aside. She was in the right here. This was her home, her property, her neighborhood. 5 minutes later, the distinctive whine of police sirens announced the arrival of Meadowbrook Heights' finest. 2 patrol cars pulled up to the curb, and 4 officers emerged. Karen felt a surge of satisfaction. This would send exactly the right message to anyone else who might be thinking of causing trouble in their community. Officer Martinez, a heavy-set man in his 40s whom Karen recognized from neighborhood events, approached with his partner, a younger woman whose nameplate read Foster. "We received a call about a trespassing situation." "Yes, officer, thank you for coming so quickly." Karen gestured dramatically toward the young man, who hadn't moved from his position by the fence. "This individual has been lurking around my property all day. When I confronted him, he refused to leave. I want him arrested for trespassing." Officer Martinez looked from Karen to the young man, his expression professionally neutral. "Sir, can you tell me what you're doing here?" The young man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Officer, my name is David Chen. And there seems to be some confusion about who owns this property." Karen let out a sharp laugh. "Confusion? I've lived here for 6 months. I have the deed, the mortgage papers, the utility bills." Officer Foster interrupted gently. "Let's hear what he has to say." David reached slowly into his jacket pocket, and Karen instinctively stepped back. "Careful," she warned the officers. "He might be armed." But David's hand emerged holding a leather folder, which he opened to reveal official-looking documents. "Officer, this is the deed to 247 Elm Street. And if you check the name on it, you'll find it belongs to David Chen." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Karen felt her mouth open and close soundlessly as Officer Martinez took the folder and examined its contents. The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Officer Martinez said slowly, his voice carefully controlled. According to this deed, this property belongs to Mr. Chen. Can you show me your ownership documents? Karen's mind reeled. This was impossible. She owned this house. She'd bought it fair and square. She had the papers to prove it. Didn't she? My documents are inside, she stammered. But this is ridiculous. I've been living here for months. All mine. 20 minutes after the police left, Karen's doorbell rang with the persistence of someone who wouldn't be ignored. She sat frozen on her couch, David's couch, clutching a glass of wine with hands that hadn't stopped shaking since she'd watched him unlock her front door with his own key. The ringing continued, accompanied now by urgent knocking. Through the peephole, Karen saw Melissa Crawford's perfectly highlighted hair and the concerned faces of at least 3 other neighbors clustered behind her. The neighborhood watch committee had assembled for an emergency session. Karen, honey, open up. We saw the police cars. Melissa's voice carried the kind of forced cheer reserved for crisis management. We are here to help. Karen considered, pretending she wasn't home, but her car was in the driveway and the living room lights were on. Besides, word would spread through Meadowbrook Heights within the hour anyway. Better to control the narrative while she still could. She opened the door to find not just Melissa, but Bob Henderson from next door, Janet Phillips from across the street, and Tom Morrison from the corner house. The entire inner circle of the HOA stood on her porch with expressions of concerned curiosity. Oh, sweetheart, Melissa pushed past Karen into the living room, her eyes immediately scanning for signs of disturbance. What happened? Someone said. They saw that vagrant being arrested. He wasn't arrested. Karen's voice sounded distant to her own ears. He wasn't a vagrant either. Bob Henderson, a retired insurance adjuster with the persistence of a bloodhound, stepped forward. So what was the situation? Did he try to break in? We've been worried about security ever since the Hendersons had their garage broken into last month. Karen sank into her armchair, David's armchair, and looked at the faces of people who'd become her friends, her allies, her chosen family over the past 6 months. People who'd invited her to block parties and book clubs, who'd helped her understand the unwritten rules of Meadowbrook Heights society. He owns this house, she said quietly. The silence that followed was so complete that Karen could hear the ice maker cycling in the kitchen. I'm sorry, what? Janet Phillips laughed nervously. That's impossible. You bought this house 6 months ago. We were at your housewarming party. Apparently, the foreclosure that allowed me to buy it was illegal. The courts overturned it. The house belongs to the Chen family. Each word felt like swallowing glass. David Chen. The man I called the police on. Melissa's perfectly composed expression cracked slightly. Karen, that can't be right. First National Bank wouldn't make that kind of mistake. They're illegal. Safeguards, the safeguards failed. Karen took a large gulp of wine. I've been living in someone else's house for 6 months. Sleeping in their beds, eating in their kitchen, replanting their garden with flowers they didn't choose. Tom Morrison, ever the pragmatist, sat heavily on the edge of the coffee table. Jesus, Karen. What are you going to do? Before she could answer, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Reynolds and Associates, her real estate attorney's office. Word traveled fast in professional circles too. I should take this, she said, grateful for the interruption. Karen, it's Jim Reynolds. I just got off the phone with someone from the county clerk's office. There's a problem with your property on Elm Street. Oh no. The police were just here. Listen to me carefully. Don't sign anything, don't agree to anything, and don't move out until we've had a chance to review all the documentation. This could be a scam. Karen felt a flicker of hope. A scam. Property deed fraud is more common than people think. Someone shows up with fake papers claiming to own a house, hoping to intimidate the real owner into leaving. I've seen it a dozen times. The neighbors leaned forward, hope lighting their faces as they listened to Karen's side of the conversation. But Jim, his paperwork looked official. The police seemed to believe it. Police aren't trained to spot sophisticated document forgery. Meet me at my office first thing tomorrow morning and bring every piece of paperwork you have. We'll get to the bottom of this. After hanging up, Karen felt the first real breath she'd taken in an hour. My attorney thinks it might be fraud. Of course it is, Melissa said, her voice sharp with renewed confidence. I knew that story sounded fishy. A family losing their house to medical bills. Please. That's emotional manipulation 101. Bob. Henderson nodded vigorously. And showing up here trying to intimidate a woman living alone. Classic con man behavior. We should call the police back, Janet suggested. Report the attempted fraud. Karen's phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. Mrs. Whitmore, this is David Chen. I understand this is difficult, but my family will be by tomorrow at 10 a.m. to begin moving our belongings back in. We'll be respectful of your things and give you time to make arrangements. We have nowhere else to go. Karen showed the message to the group, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The audacity, Melissa breathed. He's doubling down on the scam. We need to document everything, Tom said, pulling out his own phone. Photos, videos, witness statements. Build a case. Over the next hour, Karen's living room transformed into a war room. Her neighbors made phone calls to their own attorneys, researched property fraud online, and constructed elaborate theories about David Chen's motivations and methods. The wine flowed freely, and with each glass, their outrage grew more righteous. I bet he's been watching the house for weeks, Bob theorized. Learning your routine, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And that sob story about his father dying. Janet shook her head. Textbook emotional manipulation. They probably researched the previous owners and craft their story around real events. Karen found herself nodding along, desperate to believe that this was all a terrible mistake that could be fixed with the right lawyers and enough determination. But something nagged at her, the way David had looked at the house, not like someone casing it for a robbery, but like someone seeing a lost love. Around 9 o'clock, Melissa's husband called to say she needed to come home. The others followed shortly after, leaving Karen alone with promises to reconvene first thing in the morning and pledges of unwavering support. We are not going to let some con artist steal your home, Melissa said firmly, squeezing Karen's hands. Meadowbrook Heights takes care of its own. After they left, Karen poured herself another glass of wine and wandered through the house, seeing it with new eyes. She'd made changes, certainly, new paint in the bedroom, different light fixtures in the dining room, her own furniture arranged to suit her tastes. But underneath her additions, traces of the previous life remained. In the kitchen, she noticed for the first time that the wallpaper near the breakfast nook had been carefully patched in several places, as if someone had removed children's artwork or family photos. The hardwood floors showed where patterns that didn't match her furniture placement, pathways worn by different feet walking different routes through daily life. Upstairs, in what she'd converted to a home office, she found something that made her stomach clench. Behind the desk she'd pushed against the wall, someone had written in pencil on the baseboard, Emma Chen, age 8, future astronaut. The writing was careful and hopeful, the kind of thing a child does when they believe their bedroom will be theirs forever. Karen stared at the inscription until her vision blurred, then quickly pushed the desk back into place. Her laptop chimed with an email notification. Jim Reynolds had sent her a list of documents to bring to tomorrow's meeting, along with a sobering warning: even if this is legitimate and you are the victim of an illegal sale, recovery could take months or years. Prepare for a long fight. At midnight, unable to sleep, Karen found herself at the living room window again, looking out at the street that had become her home. Everything looked different now, smaller somehow, less permanent. Like a movie set that could be struck and moved at any moment. A car pulled up across the street, and Karen's heart stopped. A small sedan with Ohio plates that she didn't recognize. 3 figures got out, a woman about Karen's age with graying hair pulled back in a ponytail, a teenage girl with David's dark eyes, and David himself. They stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, not moving toward the house but simply looking at it. The woman, David's mother, Karen assumed, had her arm around the girl's shoulders. Even from this distance, Karen could see the emotion in their posture. David pointed to something on the second floor, and the girl nodded. They were probably looking at what had been her bedroom, Karen realized. The room where someone had once written Emma Chen, age 8, future astronaut, on the baseboard. The family conference lasted only a few minutes before they got back in their car and drove away. But in those few minutes, Karen saw something that made her expensive wine taste like ash in her mouth. She saw a family looking at their home. Not the predatory gaze of con artists casing a mark. Not the calculating assessment of criminals planning a scam. Just 3 people who had lost something precious and were trying to work up the courage to reclaim it. Karen's phone rang, making her jump. The caller ID showed her ex-husband's number. "Hello, Richard. Karen, I just got the weirdest call. From Melissa Crawford. Something about property fraud and con artists. What the hell is going on?" Richard had always been good in a crisis, which was probably why their divorce had been so amicable. Karen barely slept. She spent the early morning hours pacing through the house, seeing ghosts in every corner. The family photos she'd hung on the wall seemed to mock her now, her perfectly curated life displayed in frames that had once held someone else's memories. By 7 a.m., she'd made coffee and was sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by every document related to the house purchase. The paperwork told a story she'd never bothered to read carefully before. Purchase date: September 15th. The same day she'd gotten her divorce settlement. She'd been so eager to start fresh, to prove to Richard and everyone else that she could build a better life on her own, that she'd rushed through the closing process. Her phone buzzed with a text from Melissa, "War counsel at 8 a.m. We're not letting them intimidate you." Karen stared at the message, then deleted it without responding. At 9:45, she positioned herself at the front window and waited. Across the street, she could see Bob Henderson pretending to water his already soaked garden while keeping one eye on her house. Janet Phillips was walking her elderly poodle in circles around the block. The neighborhood watch was out in force. At exactly 10 o'clock, the same small sedan from last night pulled into her driveway. Karen's hands trembled as she opened the front door before they could knock. 3 pairs of dark eyes looked back at her with a mixture of wariness and hope. "Mrs. Whitmore," David said carefully. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us." Up close, Karen could see the family resemblance clearly. David's mother had the same strong jawline, though her face was marked by a weariness that spoke of months of struggle. The teenage girl, Emma, looked exactly like someone who would write "future astronaut" on a baseboard, all sharp intelligence and barely contained energy. "Please," Karen said, stepping aside. "Come in." The moment they crossed the threshold, everything changed. Emma's eyes went wide as she took in the living room, and she moved with the unconscious confidence of someone who knew exactly where everything belonged. "You changed the paint," she said softly, running her hand along the wall. "It used to be blue." Mom picked it because she said it reminded her of the ocean. David's mother, who introduced herself quietly as Linda Chen, stood in the center of the room with her arms wrapped around herself, as if she were cold. Her gaze moved slowly from the fireplace to the built-in bookshelves to the large window that overlooked the backyard. "The couch is in the wrong place," she murmured. "We had it facing the fireplace so we could watch movies together on winter nights." Karen felt each observation like a small cut. "Would you like some coffee? Or tea?" "Coffee would be nice," Linda said. "Thank you." In the kitchen, Emma immediately gravitated toward the breakfast nook. "This is where I did my homework every day after school. Mom would sit right here and help me with math while she made dinner." "You were good at math," Linda said, her voice thick with emotion. "Remember when you figured out that geometry problem that stumped your brother?" David leaned against the counter where Karen's coffee maker sat, probably in the same spot where the Chen families had once been. "Emma's going to be an engineer. Or an astronaut. She hasn't decided yet." "Both," Emma said firmly. "I'm going to be an aerospace engineer who becomes an astronaut." Karen poured coffee with shaking hands, acutely aware that she was serving guests in their own kitchen. "How long did you live here?" 12 years, Linda answered. "We bought it when David was 13 and Emma was 3. It was the first house we ever owned. We saved for 10 years for the down payment, David added. Dad worked 2 jobs and Mom cleaned houses on weekends. They wanted to make sure we had a real home, not just another rental. Karen set the coffee cups on the kitchen table, the same table where Emma had done homework, where Linda had helped with math problems, where a family had shared 12 years of meals and conversations and ordinary moments that now seemed precious beyond measure. Tell me what happened, Karen said quietly. Linda's hands wrapped around her coffee cup like it was an anchor. My husband, David, and Emma's father, was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 2 years ago. Stage 4. The doctors said he had 6 months, maybe a year with treatment. He lasted 18 months, David said. Fought like hell. But the medical bills. He shook his head. Even with insurance, the costs were astronomical. Experimental treatments, medications that cost more per month than Dad used to make in 3 months. We refinanced the house twice, Linda continued. Borrowed against everything we had. But it wasn't enough. When Michael died last January, we were 3 months behind on the mortgage and owed more than the house was worth. Emma spoke for the first time since sitting down. I wanted to drop out of school and get a job. But Mom said Dad would haunt me forever if I didn't graduate. We tried to work with the bank, David said. Applied for loan modifications, hardship deferrals, everything. They strung us along for months with paperwork and phone calls and promises that someone would help us. Meanwhile, the foreclosure process was moving forward. We thought we had more time, Linda whispered. The bank representatives kept saying they were working on solutions. Right up until the day they changed the locks. Karen felt sick. When did that happen? August 30th, David said. We came home from Emma's back-to-school night to find a notice on the door and new locks. Everything we owned was locked inside. We had to stay in a hotel that first night, Emma added. Mom cried in the bathroom so David and I wouldn't see, but we heard her anyway. Linda reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. I'm not ashamed of crying. Losing your father and your home in the same year. Anyone would cry. But we didn't give up, David said fiercely. We hired a lawyer, borrowed money from my aunt to pay the retainer. And we found out that the bank had violated multiple federal regulations during the foreclosure process. They hadn't properly notified us of our rights, hadn't given us adequate time to cure the default, and had sold the house while our loan modification application was still pending. The lawyer said it was a clear-cut case, Linda continued. But the legal system moves slowly. It took months to get a hearing, and meanwhile, she gestured around the kitchen. Meanwhile, someone else was making coffee in our kitchen. The weight of that simple statement settled over Karen like a heavy blanket. For 6 months, while this family fought to reclaim their home, she had been living their life. Drinking coffee from counters they had chosen, sleeping in bedrooms they had painted, tending a garden they had planted. The judge ruled in our favor. 3 weeks ago, David said. Voided the foreclosure, ordered the house returned to us, and awarded damages against the bank. But by then, you were already here. We didn't know about you at first, Linda said quickly. When we drove by and saw lights on, we thought maybe the bank was staging it for sale. Then we saw your car, your things. We watched you gardening. One day, Emma admitted. You planted marigolds where Mom's roses used to be. I wanted to tell you that roses would do better in that spot, but David said we had to wait for the legal stuff to be finished. Karen's throat felt raw. I replaced your roses. It's okay, Linda said, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. They were getting old anyway. Marigolds are cheerful. The silence that followed was broken by a sharp knock on the front door. Through the kitchen window, Karen could see Melissa Crawford's SUV parked at the curb, along with several other cars. She recognized. That's my neighbor, Karen said. She's trying to help me. David's expression hardened. Help you how? Before Karen could answer, Melissa's voice rang out from the front porch. Karen. Open up. We know you're in there and we're not leaving until we make sure you're safe. Linda looked confused. Safe from what? Karen closed her eyes. They think you're con artists. They think this is all an elaborate scam. Jesus, David muttered. Even now? The knocking intensified, joined by additional voices. Karen could hear Bob Henderson shouting something about calling the police if she didn't respond in 30 seconds. I should go talk to them, Karen said, standing up. We'll come with you, David said firmly. David, no. They are already convinced. You're criminals. Seeing you in here will only make things worse. Mrs. Whitmore, Linda said quietly, we're not hiding anymore. We've spent 6 months feeling ashamed, like we did something wrong by losing our house. But we didn't. We're the victims here, not the criminals. Emma stood up, her chin raised in a gesture that reminded Karen painfully of David. I want to see my room anyway. I want to make sure my astronaut thing is still there. Karen's heart broke a little more. Your astronaut thing? I wrote on the wall behind where my desk used to be. Emma Chen, age 8, future astronaut. I was worried you might have painted over it. I found it, Karen admitted. I pushed my desk in front of it. Emma's face lit up with relief. Can I see it? The knocking at the front door had escalated to pounding, and Karen could hear multiple voices now, including Tom Morrison threatening to call the police. Come on, Karen said, feeling something shift inside her chest. Let's go face the neighborhood. Watch together. They walked to the front door as a group, David and Linda flanking Karen, Emma bouncing on her toes with excitement about seeing her old room. When Karen opened the door, she found not just Melissa and the usual suspects, but half the neighborhood.